Firstly, welcome to everyone present and those on live stream. Swan City Council acknowledges the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet and pay their respects to the elders, past and present. Get Councillor Young to lead the prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We beseech you, Lord, that we may be granted wisdom, understanding and sincerity of purpose in the decisions we are called on to make for the welfare of the people of the rural city of Swan Hill.
Amen. Amen. Okay, please be seated. Apologies. We have one apology from Councillor Nicole, who is unwell. Can I have someone move?
I'll move those.
Moved Councillor Jeffrey, seconded Councillor King. All in favour? Carried. Thank you. We have the directors and officers present. We have our CEO, Mr. Scott Barber. We have our Director of Farm Protect, Corporate Services, Development and Planning, Heather Green. Our Director of Infrastructure has just walked in, Mr. McClendon, thank you. And our Director of Customer, was it?
Community Services.
Community Services, Community Services, Mr. Myers, thank you. Confirmation of minutes, councillors, from the meeting of the council on the 15th of November. So with it, move Councillor King.
I'll second.
Seconded Councillor Jeffrey. All in favour? Carried. Disclosures of conflict of interest. Any disclosures of conflict of interest, councillors? None. I have one that I need to disclose. It's in relation to B 22.112. I have an indirect conflict in relation to the property as my mother-in-law's, and it may be a financial advantage to her. So I'll declare a conflict and leave the room at that time. We have petitions. We have received one petition, councillors, which is in the agenda. I think you've all read that. Received on the 30th of December in relation to child-proof gates at Bissasali Park Playground in Holland Street, Rottendale. The petition has been received by us. If there's any questions at all, councillors, if not, I'll ask for a motion.
I'll move as per the recommendations.
As per the recommendations, seconded. Councillor Young, thank you. So, new seconded Councillor Young. All in favour? So we'll move that to a further council meeting, thank you. With that, we move straight into this public question time. This one on the agenda. We're going to public question time. Council, we do have a question. Someone to suspend standing orders. Thank you, Councillor Moore. Seconded Councillor Young. We did receive one question from Miss Alison Black. The question was, when will the new expanded facilities at the Rottendale Leisure Centre be open for public use? Firstly, thanks for the question, Mrs. Black. The project is on tight schedule, and the expected completion for all areas of the project is July 2023, depending on the supply of materials and favourable weather conditions. The sports court should be open by June, and fitness area and multi-purpose gym by July. So we're hoping it'll be done mid next year. Ms. Black, thank you for the question. Being no further questions, resume standing orders. Thanks, Councillor Moore. Second to Councillor Jeffrey. All in favour? Carried. Now we'll move into reports. All right. First report being the Audit Committee, section B 22.103, Audit Committee. Mr. Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is on the Audit Committee meeting that was held on 8th of December 2022 at 10:30 a.m. And in attendance were Roseanne Carver, Mrs. Roseanne Carver, the chairperson, Mr. Bradley Hutchin, independent member, Mr. Scott Barber, CEO, myself, Mr. John McLinden, acting director of infrastructure, Helen Morris, organizational development manager, Miss Jess Jessilet, procurement and properties coordinator, and Terry Mokemek. Greg Kushel, independent member, Mr. Mayor Les McPhee, Mr. Bruce Myers, Miss Heather Green, Mr. Ashfrey, Ms. Laura O'Dwyer, MRDP, and Ms. Kelly Thompson. The items that were discussed at the meeting, one, quarterly risk report, excessive annual leave balance, internal audit update and recommendations, our place update, internal audit reviews, quarterly reviews of financial performance and position for 30th September 2022, customer date and privacy protection update, significant legislative changes, suspected and actual frauds, theft and breaches of the law by management. The recommendation, Mr. Mayor and councillors, is that the council note the contents of this report. The minutes are attached in the confidential part of the agenda. Happy to take questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. McCracken. Any questions at all, councillors? Councillor Jeffrey.
One question. In terms of council facilities that are used by outside organisations, like sporting agencies, what role does council have to make sure that they're following the child safety standards that are being implemented and updated regularly? Is it our role as council to make sure that sporting groups that use our facilities are abiding by the child safety standards, or what role does council have? Anything like that?
Council has to ensure that they do have their own public liability insurance.
Yeah. So it's more around the child safety standards.
Yes, the child safety standards, yes.
Yeah.
So if they're using our facilities, they are required to have their own child safety standards.
Yeah. And is it our role to check compliance, or is it up to their pet body owners? Probably scenarios where they haven't been following child safety standards.
It will be our duty of care to ensure that they do have it. Yeah. The liability rests on the individual organisation or individual groups, but council does have a duty of care.
Well, maybe it's something that's taken back to the risk and audit committee to discuss, just around what role we do have and how we relate to it.
There's no further questions, councillors. I'll ask for a motion. Thank you, Councillor King.
I'll move as per the recommendations.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Moore. Thank you. Wish to speak to all, Councillor King?
No, procedure.
I just wish to speak, Mr. Dodge.
Just briefly, Mayor McPhee, the notes taken were very concise when I read them. It's like being there. So congratulations to whoever took the notes. It's so concise and very detailed. Thank you.
Right, no other speakers. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Carried. The next report, B 22.104, Citizenship Ceremony Dress Code Policy. Mr. Pratak again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This policy is on the Citizenship Ceremony Dress Code. This is requirement of the Department of Home Affairs, and after the adoption of this policy, we will need to advise the Department of Home Affairs on this policy. The policy remains unchanged from the previous one. The following type of dress is not permitted: beachwear, thongs, or barefoot, unless part of the national traditional or cultural attire, sleepers, sleepwear, clothing showing offensive slogans or pictures, sports apparel, fancy dress costumes. So those are the ones that are not permitted. The attire worn by the officials conducting the citizenship ceremony and recipients of the citizenship at the ceremony should be in accordance with this particular policy. Officials conducting the ceremony are to wear the official uniform or the business attire. So that's the policy, Mr. Mayor, with the recommendation that Council adopt the citizenship dress code policy as presented. Happy to take questions. This guideline is set up by the Department of Home Affairs, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Questions, all councillors? I have one, Mr. Pratak. Just in relation to the policy, that it's related to the trial of officials conducting the citizenship ceremony and recipients of the citizenship. What about other people attending it? Shouldn't it also relate to them? We can't have someone just shabbily, all you've got is the people who are conducting the ceremony or the ones getting citizenship ceremonies. What about the friends and relatives that come along?
There's no requirement from the Department of Home Affairs, but if the councils feel that we need to include that bit in the policy, I'm happy to do that. There's nothing stopping us from putting something additional as long as it's not unrealistic.
Yeah.
So we can put another dot point, another paragraph basically saying that people attending as part of the family members or friends, they would also ensure that compliance to this policy.
Yes. No further questions, councillors? Anyone wish to move a motion?
Yeah, I'll move, as per the recommendations, taking on board the answer to that question, which is a great pickup. I'd like to just add that it's people receiving citizenship at the ceremony and those attending, or words to that effect.
And the families and friends and visitors.
Well, anybody that's attending, really.
Yeah.
So,
we will be happy to insert
so
those
add in
two
that.
words.
Sharon, sorry to put you on the spot, but and those attending.
Those attending, yeah, and I'm sure the officers will clear it up in the policy.
Yeah, being cleared up in policy. So,
Yep. Right, that's the motion. I'll second for that. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Would you speak to all, Councillor King?
just quickly thank Mr. Patat and his department for putting the policy together and reviewing it. Obviously, it's within the guidelines of the Department of Home Affairs, as he mentioned. I think it's great with citizenship ceremonies that some of these things are being protected. That appropriate dress, be it smart casual attire or national or cultural dress, is appropriate for a citizenship ceremony, and these other things aren't. So, I see no reason not to adopt that policy.
Councillor Jeffrey? No other speakers? Councillor Moore?
Yeah, to confer on citizenship on prospective new citizens is a very serious event and a life-changing event for a lot of people, and it's one of the best parts of being a mayor and councillor, to see the smiles on their faces when it happens. And generally speaking, I've never seen anybody dressed otherwise, but they do take it very seriously and they all get dressed up, but we need to have these things in place just in case. So yeah, very happy with the policy and just formalise probably what does happen, but yeah, grateful that it is. That's all.
Okay, being no speakers against the motion, I'll put the motion, all in favour? Carried. Right, the next one is report 22.105, 10-year major projects plan to those dates. Mr. Pratat, again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Council regularly receives suggestions both formally and informally for items to be considered for funding. Many of the projects in the plan have been subject to specific consultation and or community planning process. The 2022-24 to 2032-33 10-year plan, major project plan, includes projects covering the entire municipality as well as ongoing program of work to replace and maintain key infrastructure. The plan includes, Mr. Mayor, the scan this page. So asset types that is included in this plan is capital renewal, capital upgrade, capital expansion, and new assets. We have allocated a total of $306,825,241 over a 10-year period, Mr. Mayor, for these types of asset expenditure type. So it's quite substantial. And the recommendation, Mr. Mayor, for my report is that the Council adopts the 10-year major project plan 2023-24 to 2032-33 as presented. Second part of the recommendation is refer projects identified in the year 1, 2023, 2024 to the budget process. Happy to take questions, Mr. Mayor. This report has been prepared after extensive consultation with the Council Assembly and ELT and the community.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
Patel.
Mayor.
Questions or councillors? Mr. Patel, obviously the Part 2 recommendation refer to the budget.
Yes.
As appropriate, but the 10-year major project plan, that's reviewed regularly, like annually we review this plan?
It's reviewed every year just before the budget process.
So what I'm getting at, year 2 onwards, they could change slightly.
They can change, yes, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. That's just for the community. If there's no other questions, councillors, I'll ask for a motion. Councillor Young, moved Councillor Young. Seconded, Councillor Jeffrey, thank you. Wish to speak to Councillor Young?
No, just to say, this, as can be seen, there's a lot of work gone into this, and I'd like to see the community probably look into these things more, because I don't think a lot of the community actually realises just how much goes on with the preparing of these budgets. So congratulations to the staff on their work, and that's about all I've got to say.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, so I thank council staff and councillors that put a lot of time into setting the direction for our 10-year major project plan, and just for the community, it's usually, my observation, the plans in year 1 to year 4, the ones that we're working towards actively to get them shovel ready and fully funded and finished. And then every year we do have requests from the community that we try and build in and shift the money around. We've only got so much money that we can spend each year on projects, which means we have to shuffle some around. So even if they're in there unallocated, it doesn't mean they won't happen in the next 10 years. Some of them are, depending on funding from other bodies, which we've experienced a fair bit in the last 2 to 3 years through COVID and from state and federal government. So, thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor King?
Yeah, just briefly, thank council officers for their work, and it's been good to go through the process yet again this year to go through the 10-year major projects plan. As Councillor Jeffrey said, it's really year 1 to year 4, and what are the things that we're really focusing on. Beyond that, it's a little bit set in jelly because things can move around a bit, and we are so reliant on funding. So yeah, for the community benefit, we are relying on a lot of funding. So some of these projects will only happen if and when we get funding, and it's good that we've got an economic development unit that are very active in the funding space as well. To commend them for their work as well for having things getting things ready for coming into the future into this 10-year plan. And as a final note, it's great to see that there's a drainage strategy in year 1 of the 10-year major projects plan. It's something that we've desperately needed for a long time, and it's great to see it in there, and I'll look forward to the outcome of that over the next 12-18 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Moore?
Yeah, probably echoing other councillors in congratulating officers on getting us to this point. But we must also not forget that we have to have sufficient budgetary rigour at all stages through the process that actually gets us to this point to be able to deliver projects, firstly through our operationally through council, financially, and secondly through our people involved in getting funding for these projects. We work overtime to get us into that position where we can actually apply for funding because we've already saved the money to get to us to deliver projects. And thirdly, carrying out projects in an efficient manner that they don't run over where possible, and they're delivered on time or within time and on budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Being no speakers against the motion, I will put the motion on in favour. Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
The next item is the B22.106, the Seasonal Workers Accommodation Project, Stage 1. Ms Green.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, or as we like to call it, the SWAP project. Council was successful, I think it was last year, in receiving some funds from the Department of Agriculture to try and assist in having seasonal worker accommodation built or renovated to comply with some minimum standards. This project had 3 key elements, the first one being an inspection and compliance where we engaged a building surveyor and an environmental health officer to inspect premises. This, of course, proved a little bit difficult because we were doing it last year during COVID, mostly doing it last year, a little bit into the early parts of this year. And of course, we have to give notice that we're coming. So, of course, they weren't necessarily living there by the time we got there. But we have got a list of properties that are in the report that is a confidential attachment here of properties where we are keeping an eye on the accommodation. We also carried out education on the processes required to get approvals to comply with various legislation, including some language, some information translated into more than one language. And we also have assisted people who are going through the process of applying for relevant permits for accommodation. This is both within towns and on rural properties. With an aim of trying to create an additional 500 new beds, we've certainly got close to that. Now, they might not have all been built, but in terms of being planned or in early stages of development. The project was largely aimed at the Robinvale district, but we also were able to do some of the work in Swan Hill and other towns in the municipality. Stage 2 of the funding, because there was money left over, is the small town audit that we have commenced just last week with some consultants looking for available land in our small towns like Piangle, Wooreen, Manangatang, Ultima, where land is available for development and what needs to be done in terms of servicing. You'll notice in this report, which is quite long, there's some high priority recommendations and some comment on the recommendations. We will continue to try with our limited resources to inspect properties that we're concerned about being not compliant with legislation. And we will continue to work with Department of Agriculture, Regional Development Victoria and other government agencies, particularly in Robinvale, to establish new accommodation, and councillors are aware of some projects that are underway in Robinvale. What we're asking in this report is that Council receive the seasonal worker accommodation project final report. Note that an inspection plan for the properties identified as warranting further investigation will be prepared, that we will provide regular updates on the progress of ongoing inspections, and will continue to work with key stakeholders, government and industry to identify and explore potential new seasonal workers accommodation opportunities, which is, I've got to say, is working quite well in Robinvale, and I'll defer to our Director for Robinvale, who would concur that we're actually going to see a lot of new accommodation in Robinvale in the next 12 to 18 months. That's it.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Tiff.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to agree. One of the high recommendations in the report is creating a seasonal workers team within council, but it's not one of the recommendations. Is there a reason why they're not recommending that be at least investigated, or?
We will continue to try and make that happen.
Yeah. A further question about additional team need, I guess, additional ratepayer budget or funding to allow that team to be established?
We won't have any funding from Department of Agriculture. That will be completed, so we have to be internal. So we're trying to look at a broader housing strategy that may require some assistance, and we will put that proposal to council at a later date. So it's not just seasonal worker accommodation that is in short supply, it's accommodation more broadly. In another project, a regional project that we're undertaking that you'll see soon, the Loddon Mallee regional area, it looks like we'll have some money for a regional housing officer that will serve 10 councils, but we may need to look at some our own, putting in some of our own money to contribute to some extra help if we're serious about getting some more housing across the municipality.
So, further question of what I was thinking of making a further recommendation that we do a feasibility report on establishing a team in council. But is council already undertaking that, or do we need something further brought back to council?
I'm more than happy to bring something back without a formal resolution.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Moore?
Mr. Green, you mentioned working with other government agencies in terms of compliance, and this comes up a little bit in a later notice of motion from Councillor Young. Exactly which government agencies are determining what compliance is, as we've recently discovered that 2 different government agencies require different square metre space per person. So which one are we determining what's compliant by which bit of legislation?
My understanding is there is no difference. It's under the Health and Wellbeing Act, or the regulations of the Health and Wellbeing Act, which council enforces. But what happens is, for places like caravan parks, if it's used for tourists, the requirement is different to workers who are there for longer periods of time. So it is quite complex, and I'm by no means an expert on this, but the requirements for how many days you're spending in the accommodation means that it has to be bigger if you're there for more than, don't quote me, 30 days, then it's more, the size has to be bigger.
Okay.
So that's under state legislation, but we're the enforcing agency, because we register caravan parks and we register rooming houses.
Okay.
And then there's the contractors that they're required to comply with the legislation. So some of them are out there measuring rooms, and the Labour Hire Authority is also involved. They will not allow Labour Hire groups to hire, to contract labour to farmers if the accommodation doesn't comply.
So supplementary question is, and to clarify, so they're all, the square metres per person for longer term, they're all the same, all the different governing bodies? Or it's
That's my understanding,
okay.
yeah.
Right.
But it does differ on the amount of time they spend in the accommodation.
Yeah, it depends on the time, yeah.
Councillor Young?
How many inspections happen during a year on any one property?
By whom? By us.
By
us,
any of
the most
inspecting-
we would inspect would be once a year.
Once a year. Thank you.
Just in relation to that compliance side of Ms. Green, there's obviously other councils who are in a similar position to us, as in staffing and not being able to undertake that compliance terribly well.
Yes.
Should we as a council be pushing back on state government, or we have trouble in getting other staff in other areas at times in council? Obviously this is an area I believe we'll have difficulty getting people who don't like the compliance side of things. Should we be pushing back on state government for more funding for this area, or for them to take that role on?
So part of this project was to give us some funding to get contractors, which we did. But we, council, has to do the follow through with prosecutions. Contractors can't do prosecutions, only council can. So that's part of the problem. And we are now down to not having a building surveyor after Christmas. We might have a contractor we might have signed up a contractor for 2 days a week, which does cause us some difficulty in prosecutions, because it really will come down to prosecuting. I mean, we're trying to get people to comply without us doing that. That's the whole aim. But as you know, in Robinvale, they just keep moving around.
And as you mentioned before, though, the conditions they put on us on the compliance, you've got to give them notice and things like this. So usually by the time you give them notice, we get there and things are all above board. So the compliance side of things is hard.
Yes, it's very difficult.
It's something we may have to look at, councils push back on the state government. Anyway, all right, there's no further questions, I'll ask for a motion.
I'll move as the recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Moore. Do I have a second for that? Councillor Jeffrey, thank you. Wish to speak to that, Councillor Moore?
Just briefly, firstly, just to note that the report is very comprehensive, and Council have been working on this for at least the last 6 years, is to get compliant accommodation right across the board. I think it's been a bit of a dog's breakfast in the past, but we need that compliance. First and foremost, we need a legal workforce, and that's the bit behind all this, is to get a legal workforce that cannot be exploited in substandard accommodation. So all these things, they're all pieces of the puzzle that Council has been working on over the last several years, and we're making a lot of progress, certainly in the compliant accommodation space. In fact, we've been leading the way in this space with having to get planning scheme, I think it was planning scheme, Ms Green, there was no place for on-farm accommodation a few years ago. So Council had to lead the way in terms of getting the volumes of people in on-farm accommodation and certainly in town accommodation, and all that was in part an educational process that the harvest concept has changed in this area in the burgeoning horticultural industry. It's 6, 8, 9 months, 10 months operations here, to various extents on different properties. It's not just a 6-week blow in and blow out system. So no, a lot of work done. One part of the puzzle to get us a legal, compliant workforce living in good accommodation, and eventually we hope to get these seasonal workers to not be coming and going, but to actually stay here and build our communities as they should. And there's many, many thousands here. We have possibly up to 5,000 to 10,000 of workers that actually could be living here, but are actually transient. And we'd love to have them to build our communities and be permanent people. But congratulations to everybody in getting this report done, and very happy to move this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly a very comprehensive report. Certainly highlighted a number of issues that we know already exist. It's just around trying to address that through compliance and education, which I think it's been a big step forward in providing those brochures to the public in language that is their first language. Certainly really keen for us to investigate more the feasibility of creating that seasonal workers team, which also includes that compliance, which Man McPhee spoke about in his question earlier, is we can't get staff to do compliance. So we need a different tack, which, as Director Green said, is part of the body of work and part of a number of projects happening. So it's a really positive step forward. I look forward to the further outcomes out of it. Thank you.
Councillor Young.
Yes, I'd like to agree with a lot of the comments that have been made about the work that's been put into this. But as you said, Mr Mayor, we are the ones that are responsible for looking at the compliance of this. I've got a further motion that's coming up further in the agenda in relation to this issue, because while we need regulation, because there has been abuse of a lot of the different areas with the accommodation, it needs to be achievable and realistic, and does not seriously affect the availability of labour, because we've got a huge issue. A lot of the figures out there about how many people are actually employed through this area are quite questionable, because at one stage we had reports that said there's only 1,400 workers needed through this area, and there's 400 workers needed in Warren without the whole Robinvale and the rest of it. So you do need to seriously look at the figures and make sure that this is realistic and achievable.
Thank you. Any other speakers? No other speakers? No one spoke against the motion. The motion, all in favour? Carried. Right, next report, verse 22.107, successful grants funding. Ms. Green.
This is the most exciting report I've had on the agenda all year, councillors. Really pleasing to let you know that over the last 3 or 4 months, from July to November, that we've received over $5.4 million in grants from a variety of state and federal government funding programs, which will lead to projects and programs valued at more than $10 million. They are listed here in the report, the programs, and I've put them under towns for ease for the community to read. Robinvale, Nye West and Swan Hill are the three beneficiaries of these grants, but they will of course also help the whole community as well. Some really exciting projects in Robinvale: the new splash park, lighting of the oval, new playground, skate park and other improvements to Centenary Park in Robinvale, and a pilot bus service project for the seasonal workers from Robinvale out to farms around Lipperoo. Nye West, a new public toilet in the main street, and a platform will be created to allow for performances as well as a power upgrade to that park and landscaping. And in Swan Hill, we're currently undertaking, as we speak, the master plan for Pental Island for Aboriginal cultural experiences, the new university, community university, that council, this was reported to council just recently. Council actually did the hard yards to get the grant, but a board of management has been established who will manage the funds. A lighting extravaganza in April that will visit both Swan Hill and Robinvale for a period of 14 days, 10 days in Swan Hill, 4 days in Robinvale. A lighting the way we call it, an event for the whole community. And then a couple of waste projects, mattress processing and recycling, and the organics sector, the organics FOGO facility at Ultima is the other project. This report really is for noting and to let the community know that council has been successful in just a period of 5 months of getting this amount of money for the benefit of the community.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Questions from all councillors? Councillor King?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. It's great to see this amount of funding coming in. Just on the FOGO composting facility that's proposed for out at Ultima, obviously it's a significant amount of funding, $1.4 million. What will council's role be in that facility, and what will that funding go towards?
I'm looking to my Director of Infrastructure.
As I expected you probably would.
Through you, Mr Mayor, this will be an incomplete answer, I apologise, but it will be to establish an on-the-ground composting facility and the lead-up work, the investigative work to get to that point. It will probably not be a fully blown facility, fully developed facility, but it will allow us to get to the point where we can then start to accept regional composting from not only ourselves but potentially our neighbours. And then we need to work through the whole exercise of collection, a green lidded bin or a green waste bin and so forth. So there's a lot of chicken and egg stuff with this project that needs to be worked through.
Supplementary question then, is it intended in the long term that council will be the operator of this facility, or will provide a facility for a contractor to operate?
I think in the longer term, through again, Mr Mayor, that's a council decision, and I don't think we're in a position to have provided the advice to council yet on what the best option there is, but our advice will be based on what the best outcome or the best solution in the long term is.
Thank you.
No further questions, councillors? You had something to say?
Yeah, if I could, through Mr Mayor. One of the pieces of work we've got coming up is a waste strategy, and that strategy will start to look at what do we need to do to look after the whole, break up general waste into the different streams, and then what are the best options we will have to go through and explore, insourcing versus outsourcing. So there's a fair bit of work, Councillor King, to get there. Yep. But that's what we do need to do. You're right. Thank you. Thank you.
There's no further questions, councillors. I'll ask for motion. Councillor Jeffrey.
As per the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Moore. Thank you. Wish to speak to Councillor Jeffrey?
Yeah, thank you. This is yes, true credit to the council team and as well as probably specifically the economic team as well in getting these grants in, because that's what it takes, a lot of paperwork and grant applications, but also with the staff that are helping to get them shovel ready. It was great to see the investment coming into us to get some of these projects up and running, and a lot of them have been on their 10-year master plan for quite a while, and this is what we look for, the opportunity where state or federal want to invest in a particular type of project, that we're able to pull it up from further years down in the major projects plan because the funding has come available. So congratulations to the council staff that put in the hard work and the community groups that put the ideas forward and provide their thoughts and feedback as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moore?
Thank you, Mayor McPhee. You've heard me say it 1,000 times. This is the funding that we deserve. This municipality produces $1.5 billion in agricultural production. It's responsible. I think it's a $300 million manufacturing sector. The amount of the value chain generated in this municipality is significant. It's a $4 to $5 billion value chain. It creates jobs from here to Melbourne and probably Sydney and Adelaide, Brisbane. This is the funding that we deserve, and I'm glad that we have the staff that we have and congratulate them wholeheartedly. A lot of this depends on the talent that we have in our grant writing and grant applying people there, and I'm really glad we've got the people we have to actually write the lingo that's needed to speak to the right people to get these things happening. I'm really appreciative of the work that they've done. This doesn't happen without a 10-year major projects plan that's realistically scoped, that gives the lead to our grant writing staff. It also doesn't happen without significant budgetary rigour that allows us to make savings to contribute, which grants are usually one-on-one, very few free kicks with untied grant. Mostly they're one-to-one, one-to-two. We have to have savings to be able to apply for these grants. So fantastic work there in the budgetary team. And finally, I've just mentioned the grant writing staff. Congratulations to them on picking up on all these particular places that we can get money from, and really great work. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Young?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you look at this list of projects and how exciting it is. It's going to create a lot of economic development right through the region and a lot of jobs. So it's a great effort by the staff, and as Councillor Moore said, the submission writers, so great job.
Any other speakers? No other speakers? No speakers against the motion. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Carried. I'd just like to add, it is a great report on the screen, it definitely is. And council, being in a safe seat both federally and state-wise, we do a wonderful job in relation to getting grants really. And the community should read this and see what we do get. Because often we hear the community say we get nothing. Well, this just shows that there is a lot of stuff behind the scenes that we do a lot of work. Thank you. All right, next report. Funding is B22.08. Requests. Back over to you, Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council will recall that back at the July council meeting, it distributed money for supporting events across the municipality over this current financial year. We have received 3 late applications seeking funding from that fund, of which we've got $3,200 left. The 3 projects are through the Birchip Cropping Group, who have 2 Discovering Resilience, the Young Farmer Annual Dinner, and the Future Farmers proposal, which they're actually asking for funding every year for 3 years, I think. The Mallee Cruises Rush Are You OK Swan Hill 2023 project, which is not likely to be until August, September or October next year, and the third one being the Robinvale Euston 80-kilometre ski race in March next year. Just quickly going through each of those, the Discovering Resilience Birchip Cropping Group are seeking $5,000 in cash sponsorship. Well, we only have $3,200 left, and we have been trying to only use that money for the in-kind support that we provide, or the logistics support to pay for that. We're suggesting that not be approved or not be given money under the events fund. And the dinner, the $10,000 a year each, not for the dinner, sorry, the Future Farmers program, we're suggesting that the Birchip Cropping Groups seek funding from outside council. The Mallee Cruises, we're suggesting that we recommend to them to seek funding out of next year's funds, noting that the maximum amount is $5,000, unless they can prove that it's a big enough event to warrant a special grant. And the third one, the ski race, we actually already have given money in July to the peak body that runs that race. So council has already committed funds for that. We also wanted to just raise with council the how we deal with these late requests in the future, and we've made a recommendation that a determination at the time of awarding the annual event support funds grants to determine whether a second round of funding will occur should there be a significant uncommitted amount of funding remaining, that we do that at the time when the assessment's done in May, June, so that we know that in December, January we'll have a second round of funding if there's significant funds left. So the recommendation is that none of the late requests be funded, and that all of the bodies be encouraged to seek alternative funding, and the Maui Cruises one be encouraged to apply next year. Can I just make one comment? It's not to say for a minute that any of these events aren't worthy events, they are. It's just that we've only got $3,200 left and we can't fund all of them.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Moore.
Yeah, Mr. Green, is it a reasonable observation that pre-COVID that the event support fund was always oversubscribed, and it's only since COVID that we've had undersubscription?
Yeah, so in my time here, that's
yeah,
right.
Yeah, so probably 0.5 is probably not going to apply, but yeah, if we get back to sort of normal and more applications.
And the amount of inquiries we're getting for next year, I think we'll have no trouble expending the funds.
Thank you.
Councillor King?
Yeah, just the remaining funding that's in the 3,200 roughly. Will that just get carried forward to next year's budget? That's the plan at this point?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
There's no further questions, councillors. I'll ask the motion. Move Councillor Young, seconded Councillor Moore. Wish to speak to Councillor Young?
No, I just think because there's only that small amount of money, I think the best option is for us to not allow any of the different groups to receive that funding, but allow it to go into next year. I think that's a worthy way of doing it.
Thank you. Councillor Moore? No, thanks. Any other speakers? Councillor Jeffrey?
I'll speak for it. So just touch on probably been at least 4 years now that we have made advertised for events in the community and sought applications, and with for the money, and we've awarded the majority of that money in time, which allows those clubs, whether they're holding an event in July, August, or they're holding it in April, May the next year, but it's in that calendar year that they can plan well ahead and know that they've got funding to go ahead, which does mean that any events that are organised later in the financial year that haven't been organised or knew what they were going to do don't have enough money, but it has been really beneficial to those community groups that are trying to do annual events, that they know they apply at a certain time of year, yes, no, and they've got heaps of time to organise their event. So, bit of a double-edged sword, but I think the way we do it is a lot better for the community and the organisations for offering events. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Any other speakers? No further speakers. I spoke against the motion. I put the motion on in favour. Carried. The next items. B22.109, planning permit 10 River Road. Ms. Green, you're going to hand over to
our specialist planner, Kate Jewell.
Yes, Ms. Jewell.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Councillors may recall that earlier this year, in fact in June of this year, an application came before Council for a dwelling decision at the property located at 10 River Road. Just to refresh councillors' minds, this property has a total site area of just a fraction over 3 hectares. It's located to the north of the extent of the maintained levy near Arnold Street, so right at the commencement or the southern tip of River Road. There's currently a substantial dwelling and shedding in a garden setting set towards the rear of the site, and it's proposed to excise that dwelling off on a parcel of 1.8 hectares, leaving a balance lot of 1.39 hectares. The site is in the farming zone and covered by a number of overlays that relate to the flooding high flooding potential of the site. The application was put out to public notice as well as referred to a number of referral authorities. With regards to the referral authorities, an objection was received from NCCMA, so North Central Catchment Management Authority, based on the flooding risk. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Lower Murray Water also objected as a property owner of the adjacent site, so the land on the western side of River Road. Their concern was based on the incompatibility with the future redevelopment of that vacant parcel for a water treatment plant. And there was also an objection received from the North Butting landowner, based primarily that there's going to be an additional dwelling on a small lot and the risk of flooding that will exacerbate. Returning to the NCCMA objection, and that's obviously relevant during the times that we've recently experienced. Their concern was based on the fact that the levee bank that protects those properties in River Road is an unmaintained levee, which could fail at any time. Indeed, we saw some fairly catastrophic examples of this happen in recent weeks. So it was not only in these recent weeks that levees failed that were both maintained and unmaintained, damage to hundreds of properties occurring. In addition, photographic evidence was provided during the recent events that showed the inundation of the subject land, despite the fact that it was being continually pumped 24 hours a day by the landowner. The NCCMA flooding has been modelled to a height of between 1.2 and 1.9 metres in the event of a 1 in 100 year flood, bearing in mind that the recent high rainfall events that we experienced were about a 1 in 20 to 1 in 30. So it's considered that this is a valid concern and certainly one that has to be taken into account from a planning perspective. Councillors will be aware, and I'm continually banging on about the planning scheme provisions, specifically discourage small lot excisions, both from a policy perspective and the farming zone provisions which this site falls within. So similarly to the previous decision of council just some 6 months ago, officers are recommending that this application be refused, primarily due to its concern about flooding and the incompatibility with the planning scheme requirements. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Moore.
Mr. In your opinion, if this went ahead, if we by default creating a battle axe block for the other block that's left behind?
Potentially, yes.
Thank you. Supplementary question?
Yep.
If this also went ahead and a house was proposed to be built there, would the height of the pad be similar to the levee bank next door?
It would be, yeah, quite similar.
Thank you. Yes.
Another question?
Yeah, I've got quite a few.
Yeah. More?
Mr. Acting Director of Infrastructure, Mr. McLean. The Goulburn Murray water easement that runs along the side of the property there, are you aware that this is on page 120 in the conditions, if it was to go ahead, The Golden Murray water easement, are you aware that the Golden Murray water easement is actually not where the pipe is?
Were you, Mr Mayor? No, I was not aware of that.
Thank you.
The change now is.
It is a fact that when they put a plastic pipe up the other pipe, it's supposed to be in a straight line, and there's a significant kink in the pipe, and that was done at the time not to disturb the trees. It actually goes out of the road. So any easement that the Golden Murray water people came down thinking the easement and the pipe was in a certain place, but it was actually in a different place. So it's actually not correct. So that, yeah, trouble. In your opinion, option 18, all stormwater must be directed to Council's legal point of discharge in accord with the requirements of the responsible authority. Where is the nearest legal point of discharge for that property?
It will be at the front of the property in the table drain that sits out the front.
So in other words, it just goes out to the front of the property and just ponds there.
There are significant drainage problems in that estate, that's correct.
So there's nowhere else for it to go.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I can better answer is there is significant drainage problems when there is heavy rains. For light rain events, the system copes, but we have had a history of it being overloaded.
Condition 17. Proposed lot 2 must be provided with connection to the reticulated sewerage system in accordance with the requirements of the relevant urban water authority. Is that possible to be connected to our main sewerage system, or is that to be connected through septic tank? Is that what that means?
Kate might be able to answer that one.
Yeah, thank you very much. It is possible, but it would require a significantly long pipe to connect through, which would have to go either around the levee or underneath.
So to clarify, this condition here stipulates that it must be connected into the town sewage scheme.
And that is a Lower Murray water sewage scheme, not council's.
Not council, yeah, sorry, yep. No further questions, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor King?
Yeah, just following up on the drainage question. Number 13 in the conditions says the permit holder must ensure that stormwater runoff from the site can be retained within the boundaries of the lot to the satisfaction of the responsible authority, which would seem to be in direct conflict to one of the other conditions that says the stormwater can be discharged to council's legal point of discharge, which you're telling us is the table drain out the front. So which one is it? Is it retained on site, or is it discharged to the table drain out the front?
One is a mandatory planning scheme condition.
Which one's that?
That was the first one that you referred to, the retain on site.
So that's meant. So that would supersede the other condition which allows discharge to the table drain. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, that's a Golden Murray water condition, so it's not our condition.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm just trying to,
which one
because they're in conflict to each other. So I'm just trying to determine which one's which. So that being said, it would be the permit holder's responsibility to ensure that stormwater is retained on site. Is that just to be 100% clear? So in light of that, and given the information that's been received that the landholder was in fact pumping water from the site during inundation, which I'll add is not from flooding but from rainfall, just to be very clear that in recent high river events we actually haven't seen any flooding in that area. It's been from rainfall inundation. Where's that water being pumped to, and does the landowner have a legal right to pump that water from the site?
I understand through you, Mr Mayor, that some of it wasn't an isolated event, that anyone who travelled around there saw a lot of pumps and heard a lot of pumps. I understand from evidence that's been provided to officers that it was going into the channel, but whereas other landholders were pumping directly into the river.
Right. So, which none of that would have been allowed by any landholders, unless they had, obviously, because I'm aware that some people can get permission from Golden Murray Water occasionally to pump back into channels. But right, that clarifies that. Thank you.
Just a question for you. The Golden Murray Water, in their objection, there is put it down to the concern of the creation of additional lots for non-agricultural purposes in the farming zone. Didn't Golden Murray Water originally purchase their site and subdivide it into small blocks?
Mr Mayor, the site was subdivided prior to Golden Murray Water purchasing it.
Well, I understand that was part of it. It was purchased from the objector north of the property, and Golden Murray Water's purchasing the site, part of that role was to subdivide into small lots.
Well, there was lots created, but well, actually that's not correct. There was an existing number of lots, some of them were reconfigured. But that was done by the landholder, not by Golden Murray Water.
I thought it was Golden Murray Water's expense. That's all right, no worries, thank you. Now, there's no further questions, councillor, so I'll ask for a motion.
As per the recommendation, Mr Mayor. That's to refuse.
To refuse a grant permit. Do I have a second for that? Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Would you speak to that, Councillor Moore?
Yeah, it pains me to actually move this because we really do want to try and encourage development along the river. But on a couple of grounds. One, we're creating a battle axe block, which council has been pretty averse to doing over a long period of time. Secondly, I think the drainage issues here, I just think are insurmountable. Living fairly close by to there, I've seen the amount of water that can accumulate in that area. I think council may be creating a rod for its own back in the future here. If a house did get built there, it could come back on council that we allowed this to happen, and then significant inundation could occur in a significant rainfall event once again. Particularly if we pursue the compliance of not pumping off the drainage, and as been alluded to by Ms Jewell, there's been significant pumping for many weeks to drain that small piece of land, and it's not just that piece of land. The roadside drainage comes all the way down to there because that's the lowest point, and I just think, as much as I'd like to have development, this particular one, I think we're really creating a big heap of problems, and over the longer term, just for any future landholder or just in that area in general. That's my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's what I think. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously significant concerns around the development of the house there, the impact that that would have on the neighbouring houses in the farming zone, but also to the south where it is developed residential areas. And while resident events hasn't been flooded by the river, it has been inundated by water, significant rain, which does cause flooding of certain areas. And there is nowhere, given some of the history and the removal of soil from that block of land in order to move elsewhere for further development, it is a bit of a good area for water to be collected, and the level of the height that will be required to build a house there, depending on the size as well, would have further impacts on the surrounding area with where water's going to be and what they're going to do with it. So, and in line with being against our planning scheme, I'm in favour of refusing the application.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers for? Speakers against? No, being no further speakers, I'll put the motion all in favour. Carried. The next report is B22.110, planning permit again, but this is at 15 Kimberley Avenue. Ms Jewell, you're voting on with this one?
Correct. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Councillors, we've received a planning permit application for the construction of 5 dwellings over 2 lots, which, if this is successful, will be required to be consolidated. The total site area is in the order of 2,300 square metres, which is a generous site. Quite an unusually shaped site that councillors will note, the site lies to the east of the racecourse and has frontages to both Kimberley Avenue and Albert Street. So this proposal has been assessed against the planning scheme, various sections, so both policy and the sort of specific requirements that control multi-unit developments. And there was only one area of non-compliance, and that was to do with frontage setback. But officers considered that there can be adjustments made, and that the proposed frontage setback at around about 7 metres is still generous enough and sort of fits in with the landscape, with the neighbourhood character of the area. Upon referral, there was no objections received from either Lower Murray Water or CFA. Public notification initially drew a couple of objections, but with the proponent working with the objectors, was able to get removal, leaving only one remaining. The concern raised by that objection was to do with amenity, noise and traffic, additional vehicles, the removal of a street tree, potential for overshadowing. Once again, the applicants were very proactive with trying to assuage the objectors' concern, but not successful. I also must add that this applicant had worked really closely with officers. This was about the third incantation to try and get over some initial concerns, because there's easements that bisect this land. And it was pleasing as officers to be able to get a result that we believe will deliver high quality accommodation that meets the needs of a variety of people in our community. And as a consequence, officers have recommended that a notice of decision to grant a permit with a number of conditions that appear on that report be supported by councillors.
Questions, councillors?
Thank you. In terms of the remaining objection, I had a couple of concerns around brick wall being their fence line, and the offset of, I think it was a garage at the front being too close to affect the fence. But my understanding of reading the report is that they've both been addressed by having a continuous fence and increasing that from brick wall from 500mm to 1000mm, which is in line with the guidelines. Is that correct? Yeah. So in terms of the objection, there's no, apart from the closeness of the building to the fence lines in line of sight, there's no building objections in terms. Some of there's like amenities and car parking. There's no impact of building on them.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. And it must be borne in mind that without a planning permit, a dwelling could be built quite happily with just building approval, on the boundary. So, yeah, that's what's going to be weighed up.
Thank you. That's all.
Yeah, a couple of questions. One of mine was around that compliance as well. So it is acceptable to build a garage wall on the boundary?
Correct.
Yep. Other question was, has council done any study to measure the impact of on-street parking? I note that these are 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom townhouse developments, which would suggest that they are set up for at least 2 occupants, potentially at least 2 occupants with at least 2 cars, and yet only one of the townhouses has a double garage, the rest are all single. There's no other room for off-street parking within the development. So has there been any impact assessment of what that will do to parking on the street, when potentially you could be adding in another anywhere from 3 to 8 cars onto the street?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The development accords with the planning scheme requirements. So for a 2-bedder, there's only 1 parking space required. Even if we were to do studies, we can't legally have a a requirement that's stronger than what the planning scheme says. So, yes, it has been accepted that, that parking from multi-unit developments does cause potential for overflow onto the street, and that's been recognised throughout Victoria. We also have the reverse happening, that some people don't want a car space. Obviously that doesn't happen so much here, but a lot of particularly apartment developments now in metro regions don't have any car parking because people don't want car parks. But look, I certainly take on board 100%, and this is something that a lot of councils do speak to the Minister for Planning, that it is just inadequate to have one car space. But that is how it's set up, and we can't apply something stronger, however much we'd like to. Yeah.
So just supplementary to that, for the benefit of the objector and for other residents in that area and in Swan Hill and the municipality in general, the planning scheme that allows this is actually not determined by Swan Hill Rural City Council. This is something that's determined by state government. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it's a statewide provision, and it indicates the inflexibility of a lot of components of the planning system. There almost needs to be a tiered approach taken that takes into account that situation that I described earlier with the apartments.
Yeah.
So saying that in the suburbs, in the inner and middles, that a reduction to zero is potential. But then staging it out to address the local, because what we experience is exactly the same as what Mildura experiences with this standard requirement.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just on that, Ms. Jewell, oh sorry, I'll go on Councillor Moore, you go first.
Just how many metres was the variation in the setback?
Sorry, frontage setback.
Frontage setback. Yeah.
You're catching me off guard now, but I think it was about 50 centimetres.
Was that? Okay.
Just in relation to the parking, Ms. Jewell, there's nothing that even people with established homes, we can't force them to park their cars in those houses. They can park wherever they like.
Correct.
Thank you. And just in relation to the setback, the objector has I think it's a 5-foot fence right on the boundary. Is that required by a planning permit? Does that detract from the setback?
Potentially, yes.
Thank you, Joel. All right. Nothing further. No further questions, councillors? Can I have a motion? Good. Councillor Jeffrey, just preacher. Fifth of the post. Move for Councillor Jeffrey. Yes, what are you moving?
As per the recommendation to approve it.
Yes, Councillor Moore, second. Wish to speak to that, Councillor Jeffrey?
Yeah, thank you. Certainly it is a street that at this point doesn't have any unit development, and I know a lot of people when they're torching would have to have units developed next year to them. But we have seen a number of streets where units have been developed that fit quite well into that street in the neighbourhood and don't necessarily become an issue. And I think this is one of those developments where the applicant with his team, or their team have met with the objectives and worked to the best of their ability to come to a development that is able to accommodate as much as what they can. And I really congratulate all. Just pass on my feedback to the applicants that they've been so accommodating in order to try to address all those objections. Obviously, car parking, I know, has been a bit on it, and with any unit development, you don't know who's going to live in there, whether they are single parent or whether they're a young couple or they're an older couple whose kids have all moved out of home. Obviously, during that lifetime with that couple, the generations will have an impact on the car parking, but there's no difference to a house next door having a couple with 5 kids who live at home until they're 25 and they've all got cars parking on the street. They just don't know how anything in the neighbourhood will impact on car parking in the street or the noise and their ability to drive up and down. So I think this development will be fantastic for Swan Hill. We know 2-bedroom units in particular are of high demand and we need more to accommodate for the many different vacancies that people are looking for, which it's hard to get in Swan Hill. So I fully support the application being approved and look forward to the developments happening.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Mayor McPhee. I'm supporting this motion. Look, the developers or the applicants, they haven't broken any rules, almost fully compliant, a minor variation to the setback. Requires the frontage setbacks. This is the sort of development that we actually need in the town. Really great to see action in this space. And of course, overall societal trends are to smaller households these days. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of single-person households. The need for downsizing, or indeed just people wanting to live on their own. Fantastic place, small commuting distance to town. Got a lot going for it. So yeah, really look forward to this development coming to fruition.
Any other speakers? Councillor Young?
Yes, I'd just like to endorse what all the other councillors have said. This is something that we really need in this town, whether it's for small units for professional workers or retirees. So yeah, I was all in favour.
Any other speakers? Councillor King?
Yeah, I'll speak on the motion. I don't know if I'm really speaking for or against, but I guess what I want to highlight in the debate is just the inflexibility of the planning scheme. That these schemes are developed by state governments, typically by bureaucrats sitting in offices in cities, and they aren't necessarily the best schemes for regional cities and regional areas. And whilst I'm definitely in favour of development, these types of units and townhouses are definitely required in Swan Hill for accommodation, to address accommodation shortages. In terms of the amenity for the area, it's not necessarily the best outcome, but I feel a bit stuck because the planning scheme just says, yep, that's fully acceptable. So I just hope and pray that as we go forward, as the development's done, that the amenity of that area is maintained. And I look forward to seeing a high quality development that adds to that area and doesn't detract from it. Thanks.
All right. There's no one spoken against the motion as such. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Carried. Our next report is B22.1111, alternative waterways nature strips.
That'll be me.
Miss Green, who will do that one?
Council has a alternative waterwise nature strip treatments policy that was developed during the millennial drought, where residents didn't want to keep watering grass and look for alternative ways to look after the nature strip. It was, I don't think it's been reviewed since it was first put in place, and perhaps hasn't been used a lot, but certainly has been used by a number of residents in the community. The aim of the review was to provide additional clarity and direction to residents who wish to establish the alternative waterways nature strips, and this is done through guidelines that are found on Council's website. The report is quite succinct and goes through the key changes that have been made, and it's recommended that Council adopts the updated waterways nature strip treatment policy as presented.
Questions of Councillor King?
Yeah, just a question on the policy. It says it's recommended that residents extend their house and contents public liability insurance to include nature strip landscaping. Why is that? And why doesn't that apply to existing nature strips? It just applies to these new nature strips.
I don't know.
And is that even possible for an insurance company to extend insurance to include the nature strip?
You can, because we do it for on footpath trading and signs, so you certainly can do it. I'm assuming it's the same issue if they put something in that's trip hazards or potential trip hazards.
That's the philosophy.
That'll be the philosophy.
So supplementary question to that, in our guidelines, which took a bit of finding on our website, but we have discussed that previously, it talks about watering systems in nature strips where you're not allowed to actually put an automated watering system in a nature strip. Again, why not? Because that means then you'd be putting a hose across the footpath, which I would have thought would increase your public liability risk rather than reduce your public liability risk? Practical questions, but just interested as to why it applies for one but doesn't apply for the other.
Mr Mayor, if I may, a properly installed and maintained automatic watering system of its own should not increase or decrease, certainly not increase public liability risk or hazards. One could argue, is an overgrown, unmaintained nature strip a bigger hazard than a well-maintained and manicured and watered lawn? I would say yes, it is, but we're just trying to cover our bases.
Risk averse.
Where council isn't controlling the risk, we shouldn't be trying to pick it up. We should be avoiding that and putting the risk back to the person or individual or organisation that's creating the risk.
Councillor Jeffrey.
I have the same question as Sir King, but just one as adjustment just for the policies, a slight typo. Treatment options in the first dot point, just actually off back a bit fixed up after. Thank you.
It's the Aussie.
Abbreviation.
No further questions, councillors. I'll ask for a motion. Councillor King.
Yeah, I can move those perfect recommendation.
Second, Councillor Jeffrey, thank you. Wish to speak about Councillor King?
No, not really, just that I'll endorse officers' comments that a well-maintained nature strip is far better than an unmaintained nature strip. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey?
Yeah, thank you. I think support the policy, but I know there's a lot of people, myself in a previous property, who won't be compliant with this policy. But I guess it comes down to compliance. We don't have the staff to necessarily comply with do compliance checks and all of this, but it is probably worthwhile just noting some of those people, residents or even businesses that put garden beds out the front of the natural strip, etc., but we do have a policy in place to protect them as well as council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. No more speakers? No speakers in. To put the motion, all in favour? Carried. Okay, well, our deputy mayor to take the chair now, as I've got a conflict of interest on this next item.
It's an open meeting.
Oh, sorry, yeah. You've got to leave it open, apparently. Sorry. Okay, item number B 22.112, 247 Lakeside Drive, Lake Bake planning application. Note that the Mayor has left the room in conflict of interest. Ms Brown.
Thank you, Acting Mayor or Deputy Mayor King. This report has been prepared by a consultant planner because of that potential conflict of interest with the Mayor's relationship with the owner of the property. Council has been briefed by that consultant planner last week or the week before, recently, and I don't propose to go through the application with council. I'd take the report as being read. No new information has been provided in this report that was provided to you 2 weeks ago. So the recommendation is to, by the consultant planner, is to refuse the application for a 2-lot subdivision in Lake Boga on Lakeside Drive.
Thank you. Councillors, questions?
Questions. I know that this application is currently with council for working with Victorian government to get it rezoned, part of a number of properties. If it was rezoned to rural residential or whatever the title is, would it need to have this application, or would it be able to subdivide and then build or whatever?
Depending on what the new zone would be. The two options are rural living or low density residential.
Yeah.
It would still need permits to subdivide, but it could, yes, it could subdivide into smaller lots.
The question in the report is mentions that they want to subdivide and sell the land for farming purposes. But in speaking to the supporters of the applicant was that they choose the plan was to subdivide it and then subdivide it once it's been zoned. So I'm just a bit confused around the report says that they're going to sell for farming, but the supporter of the applicant said they're going to rezone for houses in the future.
So we can only go by what the applicant has put in the application, and that is to sell it for farming purposes. That's the vacant lot. But it is certainly one of the sites or one of the general vicinities that is part of our low density or rural residential strategy that we're working on that's being investigated.
Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Moore?
Yeah, it was discussed in the briefing that any further subdivision is prohibited under the planning scheme as it exists at this point in time. Is that correct?
Of the vacant lot.
If we go ahead and excise the house off, the lot that's left, under the current planning scheme that applies to Swan Hill, it would be any further subdivision is prohibited anyway. And that would that be refused at officer level?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we'd have to accept the application, but it'd be an automatic refusal. So what we do in that circumstance is give the opportunity to the applicant to withdraw the objection with a full refund, the application with full refund.
Okay. So supplementary question then, why do we need, under agreement under section 173 of the Act, Part 2A, no further subdivision of any kind is permitted on lots 1 and 2. Why do we need to put that in there if it's automatically precluded anyway, or prohibited, under the planning scheme?
Through you, Mr. Acting Deputy Mayor, another house lot decision could occur. So that house lot could be further subdivided.
The house lot? Oh, yes. So why do we need to put lots 1 and 2 then? It's just applying to lot, what is it? The house lot, which is lot 1, I assume, is it?
Yes, but
The house lot is lot 1. Yeah. So do we should that be amended to no further subdivision of lot 1?
it could be, but I think the intent is not to have, because there's things like boundary realignments that can occur that once again erode the whole purpose of the farming zone. So that's just a sort of a standard condition that when we're doing 173 agreements. As councillors may be aware, some of our applicants aren't as scrupulous as others and are always looking for ways and means to not circumvent the planning scheme but work the planning scheme. So that's done to not have an undesirable situation down the track.
And I also able to add, it just does give clear intent as well to potential purchasers, because the 173 agreement is attached to the title, so they don't have to go and do due diligence in what they should in the planning scheme, but it gives them some upfront information.
Supplementary question again. Does this 2A, in the event of a rezoning, overrule the rezoning possibilities? If this was rezoned to rural residential, with this section 173 on here, does that override the rezoning?
Yes and no. You could put a sunset clause on the 173 agreement that even when the property is rezoned, then the 173 agreement no longer takes effect, or the 173 agreement can be removed.
Thank you.
I have one question. Strategically, you sort of touched on it, I just want to clarify. Strategically, what do you consider the best long-term use for this land, given that it's a very small piece of land that's zoned farming? what do you consider strategically would be the best purpose for that land in the future?
I'll give my opinion. There is some ability for some sort of lower density housing there, subject to being able to be either sewered and watered and power and those sorts of things. Would depend on the size then. The size of what lot size they would need to be.
Yeah.
They might have a different view or...
Yeah, yes, I certainly agree with that. What's also got to be borne in mind, and often in planning we don't argue circumstances that exist currently, but the land to the rear is a dairy farm, so it could be incorporated if that owner was interested to buy this development slot. That could be incorporated into that dairy.
Being no further questions, councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Moore.
Move to actually grant a permit, subject to having a sunset clause on that 173, that if there is, to the words to the effect that that it no longer apply in the event of a rezoning, if that's possible. Can that be
Yeah, that's fine.
done? Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a sunset clause in there, because we don't, that's just going to create hassles down the track if there's anything happening possibly there. I would like to move that we grant a planning permit subject to that sunset clause being put in that section, in the 173. That's possible.
We'll just,
Can I just guide Sharon a bit?
yeah, that's fine. Go. I was just gonna ask that.
Don't put it there. Go down to under agreement under section 173. Just add a D. How would you word it, Kate?
Should the zoning change to allow change to a residential?
To allow further development, would that cover it?
Yeah, to a
yeah.
zone that allows further development.
Or for further residential development?
Yeah, that should keep.
A zone that allows.
This agreement
This provision doesn't
Shall
allow-
will cease to have force or
Yeah.
effect.
Does that cover it?
No, this
To a zone. Put in there to a zone.
change
To a zone that
allows residential development. This agreement shall cease to have force and effect.
Yeah.
After development.
She's
Yeah,
just getting
zoning,
rid
leave
of
it as zoning.
No, because she's got to a zone.
We've got different instructions. This one,
Just get rid of that third zoning. Should there be a change?
Yeah, now go down to development.
So this
This
agreement.
agreement shall cease to have,
Cease to apply?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
cease to apply.
Councillor Moore is the mover. Can you just verify that
Yeah,
this is captured the intent?
that looks good, yeah.
We only need the intent because when
Yeah.
the agreement's actually drawn up,
Yeah.
we'll make sure it makes sense.
Yeah. No worries. Awesome.
Happy with that, Councillor Moore?
Yep, exactly.
Do I have a second for that motion? Councillor Young? Councillor Moore?
I think the notes are pretty self-explanatory, and this allows us to the possibility in the future of some residential living out there at the lake. It's a magnificent area to live, as sort of surrounding development shows, and well, it just sets us up and allows it to happen in some future date. And given the time it takes to get planning scheme amendments, probably a long time into the future, but it's ready to go if and when it happens. That's about it for me.
Councillor Young?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, we've had this discussion many times about the statement that says about the farming zones in areas that have never been farmed and will never be farmed. And it would be really good to see this changed in the state.
Right. Anyone to speak against the motion? Councillor Jeffrey?
Speak against the motion in line with the report and other applications together. Feel like this subdivision is premature to the future intent of what they want to do with the future lot. So that is subdividing the land for future subdivision and housing development, which is similar to what has happened in there. I think it's Lakeside or Haven, whatever it's called. But the land isn't appropriately zoned at the moment. So we're excising a housing block with the conditions that they can't build a house or further subdivide, which is, yes, to me it's premature. We need to the land should be rezoned and then subdivided for the development that people have been informed the applicant which is trying to take. So in my mind it needs to be rezoned before subdividing if that gets passed. We've been trying to get areas of Lake Boga and Mire West and Swan Hill and Womavale rezoned for rural living or low density residential for quite a few years with no luck. But in my mind we shouldn't be granting a permit because it hasn't met any of the strategic objectives. Hasn't indicated what they plan to do in the application, and it's just a bit conflicting with what the applicant in the report says they want to do and what we know the intention is to do, and that is have housing along Lakeside, which I'm not against, but we're not there. The land needs to be rezoned appropriately. And in other cases where, even today, where they subdivide a house, excise it because they want to build a house on it, whereas this time they're not wanting to do anything. So there's no benefit for the property other than subdividing it. So I am against the motion put forward.
Okay. No other councillors here to actually say. I'll put the. Oh, sorry.
Just briefly, look, it is a bit chicken and egg, and I take on board Councillor Jeffrey's point, and it's been raised before by others. But I just feel we're doing something that we're indicating our stance to any future application to a planning scheme amendment, that this is where we're going, and it would actually be an advantage in terms of our strategy over the longer term to say, well, this has been done and this is where we're going and we're serious about it, and there is a need for this sort of development within our region, certainly near our waterways, which are sort of prime position. Anywhere around water is good. Is a good place to live. We all know that the implications of being near water for health and well-being over the longer term, and I feel that this is the way to go. But I understand where Councillor Jeffrey is coming from. So it's chicken and egg. We could debate it till the cows come home. But I feel that this is the way to go, and sends the right messages to those concerned in the future. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Put the motion to the vote. Those in favour of the motion? Those against?
Cast the vote. Yeah, cast the vote.
Cast the vote. I'll vote against the motion. So the motion has been lost.
I'll move a motion that council, as per the recommendation, that council issue a notice of decision to refuse.
Do I have a second for that motion?
Lapses and has to come back to a future meeting, doesn't it?
It lapses and comes back to a future meeting.
Okay.
When we've got more councillors.
No seconder for the motion lapses and will be referred to a council meeting in 2023. That's it.
You'll never let us know.
There's no what's happening.
Just let you know the outcome. The motion has lapsed, and we'll come back to council in the new year. Thank you.
Okay, for B 22.113, council expense. Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I take the report as read. I'll just explain that this report is written quarterly in keeping with council expenses policy. Thank you.
Any questions at all, councillors?
No questions.
Last for motion then. Move Councillor King, second Councillor Jeffrey. Would you speak now, Councillor King?
No, nothing further.
Councillor Jeffrey?
No, to that, councillors have asked this to become at least a quarterly report, just for a bit of transparency with the community in terms of expenses for council. So, whether that's there's 6 categories, 7 categories. So, obviously the council allowance, travel accommodation, car mileage, IT equipment, and any conferences, meals or miscellaneous, which we only include, but occasionally it does. So this is just a bit of transparency and openness on the expense of what some of the ratepayers' money goes towards. Thank you.
Any other speakers? No other speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Carried. Next one, B 22.114, appointment of council delegates to outside organisations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to consider the appointment of councillors to outside organisations and community groups. I would suggest that councillors have been through this report, and we've had councillors nominate the positions that they are willing to fill. So I would ask that councillors consider the recommendation as written.
Questions, all councillors?
The question.
Yes, Councillor Jeffrey.
What's the definition of a sub-delegate in terms of like legislative committee is like what is the role of the sub-delegate on these committees?
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is the sub-delegate is an alternative to the delegate. If the delegate cannot be there, a sub-delegate could be available. Sub-delegate, depending on the committee, could also attend and observe, but if the delegate cannot make it, the sub-delegate would be council's representative.
No further questions? Before the motion?
I'll move a motion.
Councillor Jeffrey, as per the recommendation?
Slightly different.
Slightly different?
I'd like to elect as a sub-delegate for the Swan Leisure Community Centre Community Management, please.
All right. Do I have a second for that motion? Councillor Young, thank you. Wish to speak to Councillor Jeffrey?
Yeah, thank you. Certainly the allocation of councils to community groups and some of our community of management that council hold is really important. The reason I asked the question of sub-delegate is we're sort of a bit surprised to take it off because my understanding was the sub-delegate's role, in this case for the Swan Leisure Centre Committee of Management, is when Councillor King, who is the 2021-22 can't attend, that I would attend in his behalf. Had a chat with Councillor King today and he thought he was attending on my behalf because I couldn't. So that's why I want to clarify. I've only been invited to 2 of those meetings. The first one, which I attended because Councillor King couldn't, and the second one I couldn't attend. But they haven't been invited to the third ones because I was understanding that Councillor King couldn't attend. Now, most councillors know that I'm a bit difficult to get to a lot of community meetings with a wife that works shift work in the afternoon and young kids who are just about to into the first years. in primary school, which is one step forward to get them moving out of home. But I do value trying to get along to as many community groups as I can that fit within it. So I'm happy to remain on that and also be invited to all the meetings if that's what the committee want, as well as the other role that is on there. Sorry, can I flag something that I forgot to raise, Mr. Mayor, that it is number 11, the Lake Bogan Land and Water on the Water Committee of Management. They ceased to be a committee of management as of February this year, and I forwarded correspondence that I thought council officers got. So they, my understanding, no longer are in existence, so that could be taken off as well. Otherwise, yeah, I think the allocation of what councils can do with the time that they've got available in their private and public lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Young? You seconded it?
Oh, sorry. I'm happy to go along with what Councillor Evans just has said.
Right. Any other speakers for or against? Yes, no? No other speakers, put the motion, all in favour? Carried. And just a reminder to all councillors and the pending new councillor coming forward. These will all be on our community calendars, and there's nothing stopping any councillor going to any community meeting just to see what goes on as well, for their own interest. All right, next item on the agenda, sign and seal. Mr. CEO.
Taken as read, Mr. Mayor.
If there's no questions, councillor, I'll ask for a motion. Moved councillor King, seconded councillor Young.
Procedural.
Yeah, procedural, put the motion, all in favour? Carried. Likewise, the second next one is the councillor assemblies, records of attendance. Mr. CEO.
Taken as read.
With no questions, councillors. Councillor Moore, Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Moore seconded.
Procedural.
As is procedural, put the motion all in favour? Carried.
Thank you.
Notices of motion. We do have a notice of motion. Councillor Young, would you like to read your notice of motion?
Yes, my notice of motion is that the council write to all relevant and appropriate government departments and agencies involved in regulating accommodation for on-farm labour, expressing our concerns at the impacts, costs and availability of labour to service the needs of the horticultural farming industry in the Swan Hill Rural City region. Preamble is that the Swan Hill...
No, just get a seconder first.
Oh, okay.
That's your motion. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Moore. Thank you. Okay, now you go ahead with your preamble, Councillor Young.
Sorry, I haven't trouble with my computer here. Swan Hill Rural City region is one of the largest horticultural growing regions in Australia, and it continues to grow and develop. The industry has a range of cropping sectors including nuts, olives, stone fruit, vegetables, table and wine grapes and some minor cropping operations. We also have an extensive broadacre cropping sector in the region. As is well documented, all horticultural farming, along with other sectors in all regions of rural Australia, have serious labour shortages which are further exacerbated by a lack of suitable accommodation in cities, towns and within the regions. This has a serious impact economically on these regions and farming enterprises that have difficulty attracting labour and being able to adequately service their industries and run productive and viable operations. While we acknowledge that there is a need for some regulation to control some activities related to the supply of labour to the sectors, we would like it recognised that in general the huge majority of operators are supplying an appropriate and suitable accommodation. They should not be forced to implement costly and sometimes unnecessary changes that will have a serious impact on the availability of seasonal and other labour for the industry. Whilst I acknowledge that legislation has not changed, it is now being enforced by Council so that labour hire companies can comply with their new legislation to ensure workers are not housed in overcrowded rooms. This compliance has meant in some cases the availability of accommodation is reduced to the number of people allowed in certain room sizes has now been reduced from 2 to 1. This means that married couples and others travelling to the region are not easily accommodated on these properties. Many of these large horticultural operations are many kilometres from larger accommodation centres, so that it's necessary to have an on-farm accommodation facility. The enforcement of the current legislation will make it costly and in most cases prohibitive to implement on farms, thus resulting in a severe shortage of suitable and appropriate arrangements to house their workers, who are in the vast majority of cases very satisfied with the existing arrangements. This is also having a serious impact on some of the caravan and similar parks who have set up cabins and transportable options for these workers. If these options are removed, the situation relating to the supply of labour to the industry will result in dire shortages. There are many cases where worker accommodation will be cut in half by the requirements and result in serious economic disadvantage to farming operations. Anomalies within the regulations that allows dormitory-style accommodation could be made available if walls are removed from some of the rooms to allow up to 8 people to stay in one area is not consistent or appropriate when considering the nature of the labour force. So we would like to request that the regulations be reviewed, as there are serious industry concerns about the impact of the regulations and the ability of farming operations to attract and retain labour. I've got some more notes here.
Yeah.
Can I read those out in a moment? I just want to say that these regulations do not fall under local government requirement laws, but the local government does have some responsibility to check for compliance. My motion has been raised after contact from farmers and accommodation providers concerned at the impact of these restrictions. The related reports that have been raised and should be considered for itinerant and full-time workers. So number one, the huge shortage of accommodation right through our local government areas goes across all sectors and not just farming. There is a need for regulation that needs to be realistic and affordable and does not have a big impact on the availability of labour. Many farms and providers have spent a lot of money and effort on developing accommodation options that are now not allowed. This is mainly based around situations that are now allowed for only the one person in areas that previously allowed for more. An anomaly about the removal of the walls in some areas that allows 8 people, the farmers have told me is just not appropriate in many areas where you have a lot of different nationalities and that staying in one room. So the compliance to these regulations will immediately wipe out a lot of the accommodation options. An example is a caravan park in the Swan area houses 38 itinerant workers, but their provision will be cut from 38 to 12 by these requirements. These workers are across a range of areas. How many others will have this impact on availability of the accommodation? The contacts are now saying some changes are just needed, but the ones that are needed need to be realistic and affordable for all industries. So we need to have regulations that are achievable and realistic and does not affect the labour industry.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Mayor McPhee. The old issue of accommodation shortage made even worse through regulation and compliance. It certainly came as a bit of a shock to me to find that a lot of people that thought they were compliant were all of a sudden they couldn't, and examples have been given by Councillor Young. Once again, just never ceases to amaze me the lengths that bureaucracies will go to make things difficult. This only ends up one way if we keep down this path, and that is higher cost of compliant accommodation, which then means at some point in time the higher cost of food production, and that ends up with the consumer at some point in time, either by less produce being produced because people go out of business trying to produce it, competing with imports, or they just give up and say, well, that's enough, I've had enough. So, as I said, we seem to be shooting ourselves in the foot at every chance in terms of regulation and bureaucracy. I support Councillor Young's comments 100%, but we really need to be realistic about accommodation and take into note cultural differences. So what might be all right for a bigger area for, say, some people, some cultures. Other cultures were very happy to have a much smaller area to live in. So none of that is taken into account in a sort of a broad brush, one size fits all approach that seems to be applying through this regulation. So no, I fully support Councillor Young's initiative here.
Thank you. Any speakers? We no further speakers. I'll put the motion on in favour. Carried. All right, we have no foreshadowed items. Is there any urgent items not included in the agenda? No. Council reports. Councillor Moore.
Pretty quiet month last month. CVGA board meeting and AGM. A couple of things at CVGA which are pretty interesting, mainly around hydrogen. A couple of webinars there. Missed the one that would have been really good, and that was on engines at the factory, but I couldn't get to that. Murray Group of Council's handover meeting up at Mildura, which is always a great group to meet with. Coffee with the council on a couple of occasions at the Farmers Market in Swan Hill and the Robber Vale event as well. All staff Christmas function, and always at the staff function, the loyalty of staff, the years of service, it never ceases to amaze me what some staff actually contribute to this community. Finally, Sales Yards Advisory Committee on 13th and 12th. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Deputy. Councillor Young.
My first meeting I went to was the Ultimate Progress Association, which they had a few issues over the last couple of months, but I'm pleased to say that Councillor McPhee's been very good at bringing it all to order. Mallee Artists, I went to their 21st birthday at the Art Gallery, which is a great example of the talent of the region. Lake Oak Inc., their meeting, tribute to Johnny Cash, which I really want to congratulate the town hall staff, because it was one of the best nights I've been to. Went for 2 hours and people were just so happy to be there. It was great to see. Was invited to the Garden Club anniversary out at Lake Boga, and welcome to the lady who's been in the shop out there for 12 months, who they seem to be really, really happy with. It's a very active community out there and they're doing a great job. A civic reception I went to, I can't remember exactly what that was. Can't read my writing. Oh, for the volunteers. For the, what was the volunteers? Australia Day, yeah, that's right. And then the University Mallee meeting for the new initiative, the new university.
Councillor King.
As per electronic report, nothing further to add.
Yeah. I will submit my report, I wasn't there, but just one thing I would add, I would like to comment on, was the student awards I went to for Assembly College, St Mary's and Flow. Congratulations to those students who won the awards, but I think congratulations goes to every student who completes an education, because it helps the society in general by having a good education and their future prospects. That being said, we have we need to move into camera now, because we've under the Local Government 2020. Section 66, we have to consider an item of confidential information. So I shall ask for motion to go into camera. Councillor Morrison and Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Morrison and Councillor Jeffrey, all in favour? Carried. Just remind two to go into camera, councillors. Okay, for live streaming. Just before I close the meeting, I'd just like to wish everyone in our municipality a Merry Christmas and a happy and safe New Year. Meeting closed at 4:05 p.m. Thank you for your attendance.